Today we have the pleasure to have an old friend for some of us, not for everybody. His name is Dr. Daniel de la Torre Ugarte, and he's still an adjunct professor in our department. Like currently, he's in Peru. He's an associate researcher from the Research Center at the Universidad del Pacífico in Peru. And today he's going to be talking about the costs and benefits of Peru's long-term decarbonization strategy to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Without more introductions, I'm going to go ahead and let Daniel start.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you to all of you for skipping your day at the lake and spending some time here, because I'm sure that most of the ones who are online are at the lake or at the beach, but we don't know. But that's okay. You all have done that, so it's good. But it's great to be back. It's great to be back after so many years. This is the first time that I do an in-person presentation since when? February of 2020, right? So it's exciting. I'm excited. And I am excited also to share with you some of the work I have been involved in the last 3 to 4 years, which have resulted at the end in providing this input to the Ministry of Environment, kind of what you could call your EPA, on the decarbonization plan for the Peruvian economy to the year 2050. And this has been a collaborative effort between people at the Universidad del Pacífico, a research team of an electric power laboratory in the University of Costa Rica, and the support of several other organizations. But it was exciting that during this year we could work online. We could actually do collaborative research without being in front of each other, which it wasn't that bad actually. It can be done. So I'm sure you have learned that too in the last year or so. And at the beginning of this project, in fact, the first phase of this project, I have the hope to get Dr. English involved in this initial development, but there were some circumstances that keep him out from being part of the team at that time. So, where should I stand? Here?
You're good, wherever, right in there.
Okay. So the overall task that we were given is that Peru had to update its national climate change strategy, okay? And looking at the year 2050, which is what the Paris Agreement established or asked for all the signatures of the agreement, okay? Whether the US was part of it or not, will become part of it or not, that's your problem, not mine, yet. In 50 years or 70 years will be the problem of our children and our grandchildren, but today we can live without it, I guess, with whatever the result is. But that was the overall task for Peru, to try to see, okay, if we were to develop a long-term strategy to achieve carbon neutrality at the year 2050, what will be the economic consequences of that? If that's a plus or it's a minus? And that's basically the whole idea of this in trying to develop this strategy. Now, Peru is peculiar. About almost 50% of its territory is in the Amazon jungle, okay? And therefore, the biggest source of emission is deforestation. Deforestation related to agriculture. So agriculture, forests, and other land uses are the key issues in deforestation. Energy, of course, like everybody else, also is a big part of it. But the biggest, about 65% is agriculture and the management of the Amazon forest. About what? About 30% is energy and transportation, both of them together, and a tiny bit waste management and industrial processes. And when we talk about industrial processes, we are separating industrial processes from energy. Energy is in energy. So that's kind of the point, the starting point. So we have to address energy and transportation, but we have to be very aggressive in land use. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve it. So there are three questions that we wanted to answer. One is, what are the transformations that needed for Peru to achieve that goal? And here we are not talking about retweaking, we are talking about transformations. Okay? Whether or not these transformations are going to bring benefits to the Peruvian society, and then how will uncertainty affect the path chosen or the strategy chosen. So what gives you the idea is that we are going to have one scenario, which is the business as usual scenario to the year 2050. We are going to develop an alternative scenario, which is a scenario that on average will take us to decarbonization at the year 2050, but then we are going to introduce all kinds of uncertainties that we know, because we don't have all the information that we need or that we would like to have for the next 30 years. That's kind of the challenge. And what we use is something, it's a methodology that, and that was one of the biggest contributions of the Costa Rican team. The Costa Rican team, they were already using a methodology called robust decision making, which is a methodology that basically was developed to deal with uncertainty in the long-term planning horizon, okay? And has been adapted to climate issues in the last probably 10 years, no more than that. And this basically what it wants, or what it looks after, is once you define with the stakeholders and the idea of making it robust doesn't start with the statistics or with the econometrics or with any other metrics. It starts with the involvement of the stakeholders, the decision makers, and the actors that are going to be involved in the transformation. So the first thing you want to do is you want to establish a connection with them and collect what they think, what they want, what are the challenges, what are the obstacles, what are the key variables of performance that they are looking at. If it's performance, business performance, it is income distribution, it is food security, food imports, whatever the stakeholder is, what you want to embed in your analysis, the indicators that are going to be meaningful to them, because those are the people that you are going to be talking with. In terms of the data and the models, okay, our idea was, let's use the best information we have, and let's use the best models that we have. By this time, we have already, and for many of you, it doesn't sound anything familiar, but for a few of you, it sounds very familiar, because the first thing that we did 2.5 years ago, we developed a simulation model for land use in Peru. And how did we call it? We call it Policies Peru. So we have a grandson of policy in Peru. Most of you don't understand it, but it's okay. The idea was that we have the heart of the land use model in one hand. In the other hand, the Costa Rican team, which was an electric power laboratory, had already developed in a language or a modeling language called osmosis. They have developed the basic structure for an energy model that needed to be adapted to it. So we had the two key components. And we didn't have to worry about doing an integrated analysis because the actual linkages between energy and transportation and changes in land use are small. Okay? So we could assume that by looking at the two sectors under similar economic conditions, let's say GDP, population, inflation, interest rates, whatever, it's enough of an effort to try to do an integrated analysis for the next 30 years. So the purpose was to simulate a large number of futures. We actually simulate 1,001 futures and identify the policy options that could enhance meeting us this goal. So there is a key matrix that helps organize this path, and we call it the MLRX matrix. First, the performance matrix. Okay, identify the key indicators for the key stakeholders in the different sectors. And to do that, we held a 4-day workshop, all virtual, with the key stakeholders in Peru. And so it wasn't our output variables, those are your output variables. So if you didn't like the variable that I was showing, it's not my problem, it was your choosing. You see, it's the same thing when you elect a president, okay? You're given a choice, and then it's up to you whether it's one, red, blue, brown, or pink, whatever it was. So that was the starting point, is to get the buy-in of the stakeholders on the output of the models. After that, okay, let's identify what are the key policy levers, the key policy drivers that every stakeholder looks in its own activities, so we can introduce them into the modeling system. Okay? If his concern is technology, let's say to bring renewable energy, okay, what are the key pieces that they face in order to expand the adoption of renewable energy in the energy makers? It could be that the current legislation doesn't has limits on the use of renewables. It could be that there is not enough financing. It could be that you need permits that have not been extended yet, or you need interconnection between the different sources that need to be addressed. But the idea is to try to incorporate all those policy changes, whether incentives, disincentives, lack of regulations, or regulations that are creating burden in any of those sectors. Then is to build the relationships. Build the relationships between these two policies. Be sure that we have the right relationship between the output variables that we need to produce, that we include the policy drivers or the policy levers that they want to look at it, okay, and have that consolidated, okay, in a nice, coherent modeling framework. Modeling framework that afterwards is going also to help us introduce the uncertainties. So what we wanted to ask the same stakeholders is, what are the variables that you are more uncertain? And some of them will say, well, we don't really know how the cost of electric vehicles is going to evolve. Are we going to have an electric vehicle at $20,000 in 2030 or in 2045? Are we going to have solar energy competing at the cost of hydropower by the year 2022, 2028, 2040, or 2050. So those are the uncertainties. What is going to be the cost of putting I don't know, an X-size solar plant or an X-size eolic park? So those are the kind of uncertainties that will dominate the energy and transportation area. In the land use and agriculture, is the regular that we know. I mean, what do we know about the yields? Well, we don't know. I mean, we know what is going to happen. Probably we have an idea in the next 5 to 10 years. We believe that. But when you go and look at 40 years, really, you are throwing the dice, right? And that's part of our business. If we knew what was it, nobody will call us to ask for information, analysis, or anything like that. So we'll be poor. So that's one, yes.
Daniel, I have a question. How did you select your stakeholders? How did you assess who were the relevant stakeholders, and how did you know those stakeholders that are relevant today are going to be relevant in 50 years?
That's a great question, for which if you wanted to be totally transparent, there is also uncertainty. The reason being is because we don't know who the auto manufacturers, that's the easiest example, are going to be in the next 20 years. I mean, Tesla may run out of business in the next 5. Who knows? Or something else will come along. So we are still operating with the lenses that we have today. But that's fair. And that gives me entrance to mention this. This strategy is, quotations, technically robust. We will define it later. But what we didn't test is for the institutional robustness, which are two different things. Okay? You can build around all your distribution, all your uncertainty about these technical factors. But together with that, you have to add the institutional and political uncertainty. Okay? Today we know that the Peruvian government wanted to have this long-term strategy. But what happened in the next 4 years if they change their mind? And rather than making the investments that were planned for the year 2030, they don't happen until the year 2048. So there are institutional constraints and uncertainties that were not or are not being taken into account yet, which opens up, and you will see the amount of data, which this exercise really opens up the possibility of writing 55 journal articles, because you can take an angle, and you will see that, okay? Right now, from this whole project, at least, we have been involved in 5. So it's like very productive. I mean, if you want to make a career, I mean, this is the way to do it. Generate a lot of data, and then bring different angles to analyze the data. And today we can do it because we have very powerful machines. But that is key. So, so this is the summary of our little models, right? We have very good disaggregated models for the land use. We have a nice cow, look, forest, agriculture, for the transportation, and for the energy sources. And we have very simple models, almost calculators, just for waste management and industrial processes. We didn't want to spend any time. Of course, if you are an executive of the cement or concrete industry, for you, this is more important than the rest of it, right? Because that's your business. Well, sorry, man. We can do it later for an additional fee. So this is the key modeling area, and those are the 3 elements: the agriculture, forest management, and livestock that are the part of the Peru's policies. This elements, transportation and energy, are the osmosis model, okay? And what we have is all this information coming from the LXRM matrix, okay, being interconnected into the model. And then, I don't know how many of you have used Tableau. Tableau is a really powerful management tool for presenting data. As everything takes time to get used to it, no question about that. But at the end, it's extremely powerful, especially when you think that you're talking about for 50 years of information, 2,000 runs, and probably 500 variables. So you have millions of data that you have to deal with that. And that was another contribution of the Costa Rican team. I mean, they knew how to use that stuff. So that's kind of what the methodological part, if anything. So what we have is 5 sectors, the one we already spoke, 2 strategies in general. We were not going to say, okay, what if we have one in between? Just 2 strategies, business as usual and net zero by 2050. Okay. We construct the LXLRM matrix with the stakeholders. We have 2 sets of workshops, each set of 4 days each, one at the starting of the model before we constructed or we link the models, and then one to show them the intermediate results and kind of confirm if what we were producing was meaningful to them. Not that was right or wrong in terms of is that what you wanted to see, but if that the information that you want to see, the indicator that you want to see. And then the results. What are the transformation, the benefits, the cost, and the effects of uncertainty? That's our 4 key pieces. So going straight to presenting the results, okay? What we have here is kind of a summary of the key transformations, okay? And when I put a summary, each of those has a particular target every year and a particular consequence in terms of the cost of energy and what is required for the system to adopt that. Investment in renewables, phasing out thermal plants, energy efficiency, investment in smart grids. Wait a minute, is this Peru or this is the US? I don't know. Transport, electrification, non-motorized transport, and digitalization and teleworking. Is this Peru or the US? A follow, agricultural, forest, other land uses. One of our key issues in Peru is that although in Peru, the forest is owned by the nation. And you know what, when something is owned by the nation, nobody owns it. Nobody cares, right? So one of the key issues is that during the years, what the nation, the government has done is assign rights of use, concessions. So there's concessions for the production of wood, concessions for tourism, and there is a peculiar way of have legal use of previously forest land for agriculture. And you just have to show possession, very lax. But there is about 35% of 400,000 square kilometers, and I cannot make a transformation right now in square miles, but that do not have rights of use assigned. And that piece of land generates or is responsible for about 40% of the deforestation. The one that doesn't have rights assigned, nobody cares about it. So besides the government not having enough enforced ability to do it, then not even you have an owner or a right holder that can defend the rights. So that's a very weak possession. And what happens there is that, unlike Brazil, in which most of deforestation is related to very large extensions of soybeans and livestock production, in Peru is the opposite. There are small landholders, very small landholders, 1, 2, or 3 hectares. Okay, very poor, low income. So when you cut the forest to get your 1 or 2 or 3 hectares to produce enough food for you and sell something to the market, after 3, 4, or 5 years, the nutrients of the soil really get depleted because the lack of resources have not allowed the replacement of the natural nutrients with quotations, artificial nutrients, no fertilizers, no new management practices, the wrong crop, or whatever. So how do you replace the loss of productivity in the acre that you cannot get any more cassava or any more coffee? What you do, you step out of that hectare, chop another hectare of forest, and do the same thing for the next 5 or 7 years. So when you have 175, 200,000 people doing the same thing every year, you are going to have, on average, 175, 180,000 hectares of deforestation every year. So it's not a matter of controlling the big bad guys. Here is how can you generate a system that can help those small landholders to replace the loss of natural capital with physical capital, and not as today, that the loss of natural capital, the productivity of the soil, which is poor soil, is being replaced by deforestation. So that is very important. And at the same time, there are many stakeholders that are committed to reforestation. And most of them are driven, many of them are driven by international initiatives. You have Disney, you have Nestle, you have several corporations investing in reforestation in Peru as a way to show their, how do I call, environmental or social responsibility. Some may call them greenwashing. So depending where you are sitting, you can call it whatever you want. But that's part of that. And also there's part of the Peruvian commitment to keep biodiversity, the biodiversity of the country. Then is to incorporate agroforestry and silvopastoral. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But the idea here is precisely include into the agricultural practices that contribute to generate synergies between agriculture, forest, and quality of soil. Okay, so this is key, and there are several small projects that are showing good results in Peru, with cacao, with coffee, with cassava. So the idea is, okay, we need to replicate them. Okay? And what we introduce, a way to introduce is, okay, how much are we spending in those projects, the different sponsors, this much money. How many acres is their area of influence, this much. How many more do we need to include? Well, that is how much more investment needs to be done in order to enlarge that area and make it a massive investment. And that includes not only the technical assistance, but also include the assistance on association, reducing the transportation cost, reducing the marketing cost, generating higher value from the product that they get out of the forest. So we are moving from commodity coffee to premium coffee. So we don't care to be the largest producer of coffee. What we want is, what is the way to get the largest pay for the buck for the coffee that we have. So we have a lot of premium gourmet coffee, and the same thing with cocoa. Okay, so those are areas in which these interventions are emphasized. Then, given that we have so much what we call secondary forest or abandoned forest, is bring on forest plantations. And forest plantations for two purposes: for commercial purpose and for restoration purpose. So that is bringing economic activity and rescuing biodiversity value by restoring the environment. In terms of direct agriculture, can you imagine producing rice in Arizona? Well, we produce rice in Arizona. Not only we produce rice in Arizona, but we use the flooding system. So that makes no sense whatsoever because of water, and second, because the emissions of methane that it generates. So the idea is change the production technology of rice, which of course, what is the most friendly word for a farmer? Change. If there is something that a farmer doesn't want to do, is change. So we know it's a slow process, but has to be started. Then the use of organic fertilizers. About 30% of the emissions from agriculture come from the burning of agricultural residues. And the idea is some of those agricultural residues can be composted and can be part of the shortage of fertilizers that these own farmers are experiencing. So the idea is, well, we have to make it possible. And what are the elements that are stopping this to happen? Well, some of those elements that are stopping the use of organic fertilizers is that, you know what, it's too much work. It's additional work. So if it's additional work, you have to show, and we all know that, that's why we have an experiment station and an extension service. You have to show the farmer that it pays off. And showing a farmer to pay off takes time and takes money. But those have to be done. And finally, change of diets. Okay? And when and everybody was saying that this is a scandal. How can you change diets? Well, for us, it was very simple. You have a population with a growing income. Okay, the natural evolution is that you are going to increase your share of meat in your diet. That has happened everywhere, and it's very difficult to turn it around. But the idea is, can we change what kind of meat you eat as you increase your income? And what we found is that there can be some gains if rather than eating red meat, you eat white meat. We already eat about 45 kilos per capita of chicken. So, I mean, if we eat more chicken, we're going to grow feathers. But the consumption of hog meat is very small. And in a per unit basis, the emissions from hogs, it's not that they are zero, but they are lower than cattle. So the idea is, okay, can we, and we are looking at the year 2050, okay? In economics, in the long term, everything is possible, one, and at the end, we'll be dead. So somebody will sue me for suggesting that in 2051. But the idea is that with enough time, we can do it. And just remember little stupid things. When the seat belts came along, nobody wanted to wear seat belts. Now, we all wear seat belts as a matter of fact. Something similar is happening with texting while driving. Okay? We are not there yet 100%, but we are changing, right? And we generate the means. We have Siri, we have whoever, so we can talk them, they write for us, and we send the message. So those are habits that with enough time and effort and education, you can change. And people may argue, but that's why we introduced it. No ministry, no government agency wanted to have this in. Why have to have it in? And then waste and processes. So these are the key transformations. These are the results in terms of emissions of bringing these transformations into the business as usual, business as usual scenario. Okay? We started in the year 2020 with a level of emission close to 200 metric tons equivalent of carbon. Okay? And we end up zero in 2050. Why do we end up in zero to begin with? Because forestry becomes the biggest emitter, 134 megatons, to having the biggest sector that captures carbon. How? Reducing deforestation, plantations for restoration, sustainable use of concessions for wood, and so forth. You cannot drive to zero agriculture. It's impossible. It's impossible. You cannot drive to zero what is blue? Energy, but you can reduce it. You cannot. You can almost run to zero transport. Okay, but still, there is a little bit of it. And we didn't care about waste and processes, so they were almost the same. But the key sector, as it becomes obvious, is if you cannot achieve this kind of change in forestry and agriculture, especially in forestry, you are doomed. You will never get there. So this is the biggest problem and has to be the biggest part of the solution.
Quick question before you change.
Yes.
Is part of the reason why energy doesn't pivot from transportation into the energy sector?
I think that there may be some of that, but also because producing some of the energy, how do you call it, inputs also need energy. So when you look at the whole chain, I mean, it's not enough to change renewables. It's also important how do you produce the renewables, and that's why it was so difficult to drive energy to zero. That's the case of Peru. Okay, that may be a different case and scope for the US, in which probably energy is number one, and in which you could develop a bigger portfolio of alternatives that we have. Okay, so I think that has to do with that.
And then I was thinking, because I know Peru and Colombia are similar in some sense. When you look at the agricultural sector, you have the major disparities in terms of economic development, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, how do you interface these models with the social realities we have in our country? I mean, this is getting there assumes that the stakeholders that are in the agricultural sector, somehow you have to change the policy to assess the social issues that we have to really get there.
Right.
How do you interface that? And then I've always wondered, I mean, the use of resources and investment of capital in our countries. I don't know, I have not seen a model, maybe because I have not done research on it. How do you incorporate corruption as a loss of resources that you have to incorporate in the model? Because it's there.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to change in 50 years.
That
reflect the actual realities of our country.
And there are two types of answers for that. For the social impacts, okay? In our strategy, our biggest concern was the smallholders in the Amazon. because those are the ones that we were, quotations, expecting a transformation. So what we make sure is that the net benefit from the transportation was not only greater than zero, but was significantly greater than zero, so they can experience an increase in income. So that's one. In the Andes, for the Andes, we were not expecting any big change. So whereas our assumption was very lax. If we are not expecting a big change, I mean, we are not going to look at them very closely. However, the change, the reduction in deforestation in agriculture means that you are limiting the expansion of agricultural land in the Amazon.
So you're reducing deforestation by focusing on those stakeholders in that
Yeah.
region.
But if you reduce the growth of land, what you do is you increase for those products that are related to the local market, you are also reducing the supply. And when you reduce the supply for a non-tradable product, what does it happen with prices? Huh?
Non-tradable products.
Non-international tradable product. I mean, the price goes up.
Yeah.
So indirectly, by reducing the agricultural activity in the expansion of agricultural activity in the Amazon region, you are generating additional demand for the land in the highlands. This example, cassava. Less expansion of cassava in the Amazon. What is a substitute of cassava? Potatoes. Where do potatoes are grown? In the highlands. So potato producers, which usually are smallholders in the Andes, low income, experience a higher price. So what we didn't go to that particulars, but because we have the model regionally disaggregated, we can identify in which regions the agricultural income change. And the agricultural income change, not by much, it didn't double, but by 6–10%, did change in the regions in which we have the biggest pockets of poverty. Okay. Now, the question with corruption goes with the overall question of institutionality. Because corruption can show itself in two ways. One, the cost of investment goes up, right? And second, some investments or implementation of policies are delayed. So if in the second phase, or in the third phase, whatever phase is, in that phase, when we are looking at the institutional factors, that has to be brought in, and we will see that the biggest problem is not technical. We know what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. The biggest problem is put it in practice.
And then another, sorry, I just keep thinking about, for example, migration of Venezuelans to Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. How do you take into account for that? Because you might solve your problem in Peru, but we are not in isolation. And so there might be an increase in population from all those, like political instability from the countries around you. So how do you take into account?
We didn't.
Okay.
We didn't. We didn't. I mean, that's true. We didn't. The other thing that we didn't, we started the analysis. We started this analysis in March of last year.
Okay.
So the question was, do we try to incorporate the potential impact of COVID or not? And the decision was, well, whatever the impact of COVID is going to be, is probably going to be for 1, 2, or 3 years. After year 4, we'll hope we get back to our regular level of activity. So let's not try to incorporate COVID, because at that time, we really didn't know what was going to happen. So COVID is not here, present, doesn't exist.
I know you have to make assumptions. I was just thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Because I see it.
No, perfect. And that's the difference. If you have worked with engineers, okay, you know, we are professional in doing assumptions. Ask an engineer to make an assumption or to make an estimation without measuring. No, we have to measure. So you have to twist his arm and invite him to dinner in order for him to, after 2 or 3 years, to say, yeah, well, between 3 and 5% will be acceptable. Okay, I got a number. So, and that's, but that is part of working with interdisciplinary teams, because we are used to make assumptions. That's our bread and butter. But not everybody's like that. That's what I realized, but early on. And I mean, if there is anybody which are experts here, are the group here, because there is, I think this is one of the departments that interacts with other disciplinaries more than anyone else. So you guys are used to that. For you, it's nothing new, and that's what I learned here too. So that's very important. Now, the first question answer is carbon neutrality by the year 2050 is technically possible. We know how to do it. We know what to be done. Okay? Now, do we get more benefits or do we get more costs? That was the next question. And what we accounted was not only for the benefits in terms of changing net returns, but we tried to account for the social benefits too. For instance, improving health because of the reduced pollution, increased productivity because the improving transportation, less accidents, more ecosystem services because of the restoration in the forest, gaining efficiency because of the electric power, the smart grids, and waste reuse. For all of this, I mean, I wish I can tell you we had a research project in everything. We did it. But there are hundreds of people that have done this. Some of them in Peru, some of them close to Peru, and some of them can be extrapolated to Peru. I was surprised to find that there was a guy in a University of Singapore that has an approximation, an estimation of the ecosystem services value for all tropical forests at the grid of 1 by 1 kilometer. Okay, so the thing is that I read the thing, it looks reasonable to me. Do I have a better number? No. The number says, I think if I remember correctly, it's about $950 a year. So you test that number with people that work in the field, and they say, well, no, it could be more. And I said, 950, I'm not putting a backboard. 950 is good enough. Is good enough to be large and not to be exaggerated. So in all of them, you can find already information or people who know 10 times more than you that will save you time, save you money, and you use the best information available. Is that exact? Who knows? But it's the best information available. It's the best information available. So all the little colors except for this purple and the brown one, all of them are benefits, the different benefits. Carbon pricing, reduction for accidents, higher productivity, and so forth. And then you have two costs. And the cost, and this is, engineers like to do this, and to be honest, I never heard this in my life, and I'm not that young. Probably some of you that have done a project like Proisal has, but I didn't know what CAPEX and OPEX were. But that's the way these guys talk, CAPEX and OPEX. So capital expenditures and operating expenditures. So all these brown are the changes in operating expenditures. And all these, in capital costs. And all these purple are reduced operating costs. Of course, if you reduce operating costs compared to the baseline, it's a benefit, right? So at the end, what the red bar is telling us, what is the net effect? So in the first 5 years, we are basically, this is the years of investment. Okay? We are losing money because these are the years of investment. We are investing on average on this period $14 billion. But that decreases to 11 and then to 6. That is the capital. And then the gains in operating costs start to show up. So at the end of the day, okay, at the end of the day, there is a reduction in emissions and there is a positive effect, a positive economic effect. So we achieve our goal, net zero, and second, it means that the economy is going to grow faster. All of those good signs. Now, where do the main investment, the blunt of the investment value has to happen? In transportation. And that means you have to improve the public transportation system, replace your vehicles for electric vehicles and so forth. So these are, at the beginning, the biggest investment. Second, what we have is the follow. That's the value of trying to put together two things: the investment in afforestation and the capital required to invest in plantations, either for restoration or commercial. So those are the areas in which you have to invest. How much do we have to invest? $30 billion in additional money. So whatever the baseline was, I don't remember, but $30 billion in addition by 2050, which is nothing. I mean, generally speaking, is nothing. Okay. So that's where the investment have to happen. Now, what we did is, okay, we introduce uncertainty. When we were talking at the beginning, we don't know when and at what cost are we going to have affordable electric vehicles or hydrogen buses or hydrogen power trucks on the road. We don't know. And we don't know how much they are going to cost. So those are the technical factors, or we don't know the yields of the crops, or we don't know the prices of the agricultural products that we import. Like we import soybeans, we import wheat, and so forth. So we had a baseline because we link all our our baseline by 2050 with a climate model that uses the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. So they have a climate model to the year 2050 with a bunch of variables that we use that we were able to use to create our baseline. So we took all those variables, and based on the results from the consultation with the actors, we set with them ranges. Okay. Today, an electric car that we were thinking about for a family was I don't know, $50,000. Okay. Okay. By the year 2030, where do you think it can be? Well, it can be between 35 and maybe 60. So we start building those ranges, okay, for each of those variables. And then the Costa Rican team generated 1,000 scenarios or combination scenarios of all these variables of uncertainty. Okay, and we have one strong assumption, which probably has some consequences, but we didn't explore them. We didn't want to explore them. Is that all the draw of the random paths were independent. Okay, so there was no relationship between the increase in yields in agriculture and the cost of an electric car. Now, if you can tell me that there is a strong relationship between how much a Tesla costs and how much the cost of a ton of soybean evolves, then I will say we have a big problem. But in general, I think that we in broader sense, most of those are independent. And we were considering using either a Latin hypercube to do the sampling, or, and I remember this from the years that we talked with our also colleague in Texas A&M, James Richardson, that he uses the empirical distribution to generate these paths. So we generate 1,000 paths. And then we classify each of the results in terms of benefits and emissions. So, and we have results, we have low benefits and low emissions. And yeah, we wanted them because of the low emissions, but we don't want to show anybody that they have to sacrifice income. Then we have low benefits and high emissions. That's a norm. We didn't achieve any of our two objectives. And what we found is that here we have a bunch of scenarios which are high benefit, high emissions. This is what we want. And then we have another set. We have high benefits by low emissions. And we don't want the low emissions because that didn't help us reach the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. So this is one way of classifying the results. So you can spend a few months, and we didn't do it, and try to identify what characterizes these scenarios, these scenarios, these scenarios, and these scenarios. And at least there you have two journal articles. If you're Bert, he will get 4. So that's what I mean. You are generating a lot of information that you could analyze, but was not your main task at that moment. So eventually, you may have time, or you may say, okay, now I can grab what I did. So this is the projection with the uncertainty of the business as usual scenario. Okay? So in the business as usual scenario, there were some scenarios that meant that thanks to the uncertainty, we could reduce emissions. And reduce emissions meaning so they don't grow. But what we found is that in most, the trend of the interventions was so strong that was able to cope with a large portion of the uncertainty. All of these, you overachieve the goal, and in this you don't get it. But that's what you see. And here is a little picture of what are the sectors that show the biggest differences or uncertainty. And again, forest. I mean, and that is the key. So you have to do whatever you need to do to make this happen. And this is transportation, if I'm not recalling. Transportation. And why is transportation? Because transportation depends today in the decision of 35 million people. So maybe in China we have more control, but in Peru or in the US we don't have that ability. In these two ways and processes, we don't care. Energy, you care, and it's easier because generally are large investments, large operations. So you deal with a limited number of actors. And each actor is heavy, and you only have to convince, I don't know, 25, 30 power production, and that's it. So you don't have to convince 250 or 350 million Americans that they have to drive a car or drive a bike or walk or take public transportation.
Daniel, are those companies, when you talk about energy and you talk about big companies, are they in Peru, are they privately owned or is there a mix between public and privately owned? I'm just curious.
Dominant privately owned. Okay. There is about 15 to 20% of hydropower, which is publicly owned.
Okay.
But the rest, as today, is publicly owned.
Okay.
Is it that wide because not revenue, like investment you put into it, I guess? Because like with waste stuff and processing, you put more money into it, there's less revenue, right? But you put more money into those other things, you have a wide range of equipment that could be made with the investment. That kind of, is there a correlation
Maybe the way I see it is there's much more uncertainty in the variables that are involved here. I mean, for instance, here, I mean, how much will be the cost of establishing a plantation? Could it be $3,000 or $20,000? And at the end, the answer is it depends on the species and it depends on the ecosystem. So really, to do it in this aggregate fashion, to be honest, doesn't make sense. Because the Amazon jungle is not uniform. I mean, it's not the plains. So, but, I mean, at this time, I mean, that's what I always say. You always leave important things. You always provide the answer that you need to provide and leave important things for further research. Because you want to ensure permanent employment, right? So that's the final, but this is the net benefit. Okay? The curve of net benefit by the different pathways. Okay? And what we basically check is that in general, in all the pathways that we analyze in the aggregate, okay, the benefits were positive. Okay? Even with all the uncertainty, the benefits were positive. We may not have achieved, as we saw before, the goal, but we always had positive benefits. And what changes a lot is how the operating costs move, and especially the operating cost more than the capital cost more than the operating cost. But this is the trend that we show. And then what kind of to put it on a probabilistic sense, 68% of the pathways achieve both goals: positive net benefits and 50% carbon zero by 2050. And these scenarios didn't achieve it. Another journal article. So if you're looking for a thesis, you're welcome. So this work, okay, was done with the idea to provide input. I mean, that doesn't mean that they are going to copy and paste. To provide some input to the national strategy on climate change that Peru has to have by law, and also they have to file it under Paris Agreement. They are working on the final version. So at the end, we don't know yet how they are, what are tweaks are going to make. After all, we are not the ones who made the decisions. They are the ones who made the decisions. I mean, the government. So that's where we are today, and that's what I wanted to share with you. And I wanted to give you only two things, because I think that for the ones who speak Spanish or read Spanish, because right now the version is only in Spanish. I put in the PowerPoint the source where you can find the document. Most of the figures are there. However, if I recall, what we did, what we started with the National Inventory of Greenhouse Emissions of 2014. This March, they updated and they released the National Inventory of Greenhouse Emissions to the year 2016. So we updated that in a matter of 45 days, which is once you have the elephant, it's very easy to feed the elephant, okay? And so all the work is making the elephant walk. That's it. So the numbers may be slightly different, but the story doesn't change. And for the ones who are interested in the robot decision-making methodology, these are kind of especially this one. this kind of the seminal work on that may be helpful. So that is in the PowerPoint, which if I am correctly, I think Margarita is going to sell.
I'll share it.
You will sell it, right?
Yes.
Wasn't that the agreement? Shoot, man.
Don't make us look bad because you're Peruvian and I'm Colombian. I'm not gonna make money out of this.
So open to be crucified.
Where your interest is going to go now that you've done this mark study? Where are you going?
What I would like to do three things. One is to do the institutional analysis. I mean, is to show really that this, excuse me my French, this is, if you don't incorporate the institutional ability to implement. That's one. Second, it is, we have taken the Amazon region as one region. And it is very limiting because, as I said, I mean, whenever you're talking about plantations, reforestation, or anything else, it depends on the species, on the ecosystem, and so forth. And then the third one is that there is no mention whatsoever of water. So I would like to include water. I mean, those are the three things that we would like to do. The limitation we have right now is, and this is sometimes what we have to deal with, and you have to deal with your restrictions everywhere, that the ones who fund this work, which are the European Climate Foundation and Pathways 2050, what they like is they fund the work as long as the government has shown interest. So what you have to sell it, not to them, you have to look for a partner in a government desk and say, yes, we would like that. And then, but those are the three things that I would like. Now the fourth one, which is one that Margarita brought, and it always lingers, but it's very complicated, is the social impact. Because now there is a discourse about fair transition. I mean, if you are about digging into the climate change literature, I mean, the message now is we need a fair transition, a just transition. So what you want to have is the ability, if you have the national surveys on income and on employment, you want to have the ability to link how these trends may impact the different participants of who appropriates the value added, right? So so there's plenty of things to do just by looking at this, and I do remember this. It's like every time we did something looking to the next 10 years, right? We very seldom work in a project just thinking about this project and that's it. No, you want to think in a project that has life. Okay. A good example is policies. The land use model, okay, has its origins in the thesis of Dr. Ray, who was a professor here. His thesis was, 1970? From 1970 on, Chad, myself, and Brad, and also sometimes, some input from Bert, have kept that model alive and expanding. So that model is going to be is already 51 years old. Okay. So if you're looking at research, project yourself in the long term. I mean, it's just, well, sometimes you have to do what you have to do, but also accompany that with something that can accompany you for a long time. Could be a methodology, could be a technique, could be a model. The model initially only look at prices, and supply and demand. Then we expand it to regions. Then we put it environmental. Then we put it forest. Then we put biomass. No? We start looking at all those things. And that's exactly what I transfer to Peru. I mean, I transfer to Peru, and I hope to have the luck of keep going. But at the same time, I think that if the opportunity comes, there hopefully will be opportunities to cooperate. In this project, for instance, we cooperated. There were a set of 7 Latin American countries, and the long-term projections were coming from the Brazilians in one side, and also from the Pacific Northwest in the other side. So there was always a kind of balance, and there was also a group from Stockholm, the Stockholm Environmental Institute. So trying to keep kind of the building capacity in the Latin American countries, but with the support and experience of more of scientific work on more advanced universities. So there's always opportunities. You just want to try to find them, and you have to be at the right time just to grab them. Why were you late, Brad?
$30 billion. That's chump change, right?
Yes.
Can you use this study to go to Kerry and say, we need $30 billion in Peru to do this?
Probably. But then if I only tell him that, I will be lying to him. Because what I have to tell him is, I need $30 billion to do this, and 150 to fix this, so we can use the 30 billion. And that's the part of the question that I don't have.
I was going to go back to, like, if you think about, and I'm not an expert on modeling, and you know that, I'm a production economist, okay? I do.
Simple people.
No, simple, I do look at long-term things and dynamic models, but not all these components, right? So what I think is, a good question is, how much money you have to invest to reach to a point that those smallholders are in a position to really invest and make a change. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So, like, I see 2 paths. I feel that there is a path until you reach that level of economic development, mm-hmm. so that then you can go to the next path. Mm-hmm. And so you use 30 billion for that, but then you need, as you said, 150 to get to especially because you focus a lot on those small stakeholders, exactly. Yes. Which you have the main economic and social disparity. Yeah. So you have to put them in a lot of positions so that you can think about the next path. Right. Am I correct on that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And this is good and bad, but in Peru it's very easy to associate regions with poverty and crops with poverty. So the more you disaggregate geographically, the closer you are to identify or to have the match between region and level of poverty. Okay? So then your interventions, okay, when you look at, without having to look at the income distribution, but the general result of the intervention, the assumption will be, if it's good for that region, the assumption is it's good for everyone in that region, right? Mm-hmm. So that will be the simplest way to approach it. The simplest. The more complex will be trying to use national surveys of households to do that. But the simplest will be the geography.
I was also thinking about a project we had with Carlos in Mexico. And the more we talk to the coffee growers, we're focusing on cooperatives. At the end of all the interviews, we conducted a survey. There was an issue related with leadership of the organizations. Mm-hmm. They were willing to change certain things. There were possibilities for development and making those cooperative decisions. But if you don't have the leadership in place and the institutional stability, there's nothing you can do about it.
We have found several examples of very successful cooperatives in bananas, in cotton, in coffee. And when the manager that has been there for 10 years retires, everything goes down the drain. Yeah. Because the power struggle, and And not only the power struggle, but that leader didn't do enough work to create the capabilities to be replaced.
Yeah.
Because he, like us, he wanted permanent deployment.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I see it.
yeah.
Any other questions?
Technical question. How do you choose and sequence your policy intervention? When you show pathways, you're just talking about looking at the uncertainty, right? You
Yeah.
have one set of policy interventions, but you're not showing multiple different scenarios in terms of different policies. So how do you choose that set of policies? How do you sequence them?
The way we did it is we define the key transformations and artificially develop a path of how those can be implemented, okay? Until we get to the year 2050 with zero emissions. So for instance, the number of hectares on plantations was totally dependent on how much do we need to achieve zero, okay? And the others is, was it reasonable to implement these energy changes or meet these goals in so many years? After that, then we didn't change the path. The only thing we showed was the capital cost, the prices, but the key here is to change the path, because changing the path means that something institutional has happened. Meaning what you should be, what you were planning to invest, the solar farm you were going to put in 2030, that you didn't put in 2030, but you waited until 2035. Something happened that created that delay. For us, the general interpretation is institutional factors. And one of those is corruption. But that's what is lacking, is to change the path. Meaning, what is the cost of the delay? If you start not in 2022, but what happens if you don't do anything until 2030? What is the cost of that? Yeah. Now we could have forced a solution. I mean, but we just didn't have enough information to do something as strong as that. Because you can force in both cases the LPs to say that's what you have to achieve no matter what and put it in. Right? But so we were flexible on that.
Any other questions? No?
Thank you very much. I appreciate you.